Much.
And now for the Democratic perspective, we're joined by a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Evan Bayh of Indiana. Welcome back to This Week.
Thank you, George.
Well, you just heard Mr. Hadley. He's relatively optimistic about the ability of America to control events on the ground in Iraq. Are you?
I thought Richard Holbrooke had the essential insight exactly right, George, which is this problem is not going to be solved in Washington, not by the National Security Advisor, not by the Secretary of Defense, not even by the President of the United States. It's going to be solved by Iraqis in Baghdad and across Iraq. Can they begin to think like Iraqis? Can they start to reconcile some of their differences to live in one country together? Or will they continue to think as members of religious sects and ethnic groups and that sort of thing? If they don't reconcile themselves to a common future in a common country, we're only operating at the margins. And so our policy needs to be designed to keep the pressure on them to do what only they can do. Resolve these unresolved questions that will determine the outcome in Iraq.
That's exactly what you told me when you were on the show back in April. Said we have to keep the pressure on the Iraqis. But how do we do that now? Right now, does that mean withdrawing our troops or threatening to withdraw troops?
George, I'll tell you exactly what I'd do. I'd do the opposite of what the president did a month ago when he picked up the phone and called Prime Minister Maliki and said, "Don't worry, we're staying." I'd pick up the phone and say, you know what? We're not staying forever. You need to start getting your act together. Decide about the division of oil revenue, the role of religion, the role of the provinces versus the central government, the role, if any, for former Baathists. These are only questions that you can decide. And if you do, we'll stand by you and give you a chance to make a go of it because we want you to be successful. But if you don't, there's nothing we can do for you.
So is Maliki the right guy for the job, as President Bush said?
Well, Mr. Hadley seems to be of two minds about that, one in his memo and then one on your show today. I can only judge the man by his actions and his effectiveness, George. There have been 13,000 Iraqis killed over the last 4 months. That is the equivalent of 140,000 Americans being killed in a 4-month period of time. Things are not going well under his administration unless he starts grappling with some of these hard problems. He says the right things, he tiptoes up to the line, and then he backs away when the going gets tough. They have to bite the bullet and do what only they can do.
And that means take on Muqtada al-Sadr?
It means take on Muqtada al-Sadr. It means try to reconcile some of their differences with the Sunnis who are going to have a say in this before it's all over. There are a whole series of tough things, George. It's not easy. On a human level, you know, I understand the man's life may be at stake. But if they're going to have one country, it simply has to be done.
So how much time would you give him to do that? When would you start, not finish? When would you start withdrawing troops?
I'd let him know that we're going to begin the process now of bringing our presence in Iraq to a closure. And to show that I meant business, I'd bring out a small group of troops now. But then I'd time where
Now?
Well, a small group. Well, in the next few months, by now. That's what I mean. But then I would time our process from there according to how they behave. I would call a Dayton-like conference to try and reconcile their differences, as we did with regard to the Balkans. And if they showed real progress in making the essential decisions, the hard decisions, then I'd time our departure in a way that gave them the best chance of...
More slowly.
Yes. But if they didn't, if it's just more infighting and more irresolution and more drift, then, George, Richard Holbrooke was right. Then if they don't get their act together, we can't do this for them.
It sounds like Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld in that final memo he wrote back on November 6th may have been agreeing with you. He put above the line those calls for modest troop withdrawals. What did you make of the memo?
Well, my first reaction is the old adage, it is better that wisdom come late than not at all. My second, so far so good. I thought some of the recommendations were worth considering. They sound similar to what the Baker-Hamilton Commission may come out with, many of them. But the essential point here, George, is these decisions won't be made by the Secretary of Defense. They won't be made by Stephen Hadley. They'll be made by the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States. And the President was in Amman this last week saying, we're going to stay as long as the Iraqis want us. That is not an acceptable standard for our troops and for our country.
You mentioned the Baker Commission. Do you think it's going to go far enough, though? It seems like from some of the reporting that they're going to not really recommend any start date for U.S. withdrawals and certainly not recommend an end date.
Well, the published reports had them speculating about early 2008, starting sometime, you know, in the not-too-distant future, and if things go well, completing the combat force withdrawal by 2008. That kind of a timeline with a concrete beginning, but a flexible progress, it seems to me to make some sense. But it's one that the president has rejected. So again, it's not the advice that he's getting that matters, it's what's in his mind, and I don't think he grasped the essential truth here yet.
Let me turn to politics. You're heading to Iowa later this evening.
You think that has something to do with politics?
Well, I think it may, just a little bit, although you're from next door in Indiana. We're going to have Governor Vilsack on the program after you. He's in the presidential race officially. Are you ready to take the next step?
George, later this week, I will be forming an exploratory committee to take the next practical step. I'll make a final decision over the holidays with my family and have some final decision to announce early next year.
But for all practical purposes, once you set up the exploratory committee, that means you can raise money. That means you're going to start building up a staff. That means you want to run and you want to win, doesn't it?
It means that, yes, but it also allows you to assess some of the practical things to determine whether that's a sensible course of action. The important thing, George, is I care deeply about our country. I'm distressed about the direction we're going in. We are a great nation with great opportunity, but we're not fulfilling our potential today. We need someone who can deal with the dysfunction here in this city so that our government begins to empower our people to fulfill their potential. That's not happening. Someone who can unite Americans in a politics of common purpose. Democrats, independents, and Republicans. If I can be that individual, so be it. That's what I'll be considering over the next several weeks.
Well, it's hard for me to imagine what could happen in the next several weeks that would dissuade you. But let me show you one poll that came out this week done by Quinnipiac. And it's basically measuring the likability of the various candidates. Rudy Giuliani, Barack Obama, John McCain, 1, 2, and 3. Hillary Clinton right in the middle of the pack. You are at 16 out of 20. John Kerry's brings up the bottom. That shows one of the challenges you're going to face right now. The big reason for that is that I think 75% of the people in the poll didn't know who you were. What kind of a strategy do you need to combat huge political celebrities like John McCain, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton?
Being a celebrity and being well known is a big advantage, George. There's no question about that. But look, in the living rooms in Iowa and in the coffee shops of New Hampshire, these people take this very seriously. They get to know you personally, not once, but over and over again. They look into your heart and assess what you're made of. And as the people get to know me, I think we'll do very well. I've been a successful two-term governor with a record of delivering results. I now have national security experience from my presence in the Senate. But most importantly, George, I have a deep appreciation for how broken this city is, how desperately we need someone who will unite the American people for the common purpose of building this country. And I think they'll know that about me. So look, we have a lot of potential. But to answer your question, is this a little bit like David and Goliath? A little bit. But as I recall, David did okay.
And there you got your line for the day. Senator Bayh, thank you very much. Coming up, we're going to be on the trail with Governor Tom Vilsack.
Nice to see you.
How do you convince them that Tom Vilsack is a better candidate than Hillary Clinton?
This Week with George Stephanopoulos, brought to you by ExxonMobil, taking on the world's toughest energy challenges.
2,000 years ago, they probably never imagined people would be going past this at 50 kilometers per hour. Just like we probably can't predict what we'll be driving in the future. That's why we're developing thermoplastic car body parts that are lightweight and highly impact resistant.